You're starting to see this defensive front really come together for the Auburn Tigers.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. And I really want to tackle the defensive line situation now that Auburn's coaching staff, they've really made an emphasis in the tail end of this portal. It's not technically the window, the cycle, I guess, to kind of dot their I's and cross their T's and re-bolster the defensive front. Because, look, they lost a lot of guys. It's just interesting. It's clear they prioritized the offense because I think that was the larger issue. And I think the assumption was there's going to be more defensive linemen that enter the portal after spring once they kind of get the lay of the land, and there's going to be plenty of opportunities for Auburn to add more guys. We'll get to that in a second. But the staff, they prioritize the offensive side of the football. They got the receivers. They got the running back. They've got multiple quarterbacks, the two best tackles. They got tight ends. Like, they have revamped the offense. And on defense, you played so many young guys where you really just needed to add pieces outside of the defensive front. They really needed to retool that with the loss of Gage Keys, Trill Carter, Phillip Bleedy, Isaiah Rakes, Jason Jones, TJ Lindsey, one more, Reed. And to me, you look at all those names individually, it's like none of those names is a big loss, but as a group, it's like that's a lot of production at a position group where you need a lot of bodies. And so what have they done now with the Jeffrey M'ba rumblings? You're starting to see more and more crystal balls and RPMs go from Jeffrey M'ba, the former Auburn Tiger, former Purdue Boilermaker, now hopefully will be an Auburn Tiger again soon, with Jeffrey M'ba and then the addition of Chris Murray over the weekend. You can kind of see a clear two deep, or at least, a good starting point of a two deep as Auburn heads into spring, assuming they are able to get M'ba. And of course, if that ever becomes official, we'll discuss that. But at edge, you've got a clear pecking order with Kieran Crawford and Chris Murray. You love that. Of course, the transfer from Sam Houston State. On the other side of it, a strong side defensive end, Keldric, Falk, Amaris Williams. Them retaining Amaris is absolutely crucial for this reason. And then you look at the three technique, Malik, Blocton, maybe M'ba. We'll see if all that falls together. And then at nose, either Bobby Jamison Travis is the starter or Dallas Walker the fourth. I think both of those guys are pretty similar. But all of a sudden, it's like, okay, there's 8 guys. And oh yeah, we haven't mentioned any of the freshmen yet. Malik Autry, Jordan Crawford, Antonio Coleman, Darion Smith. And then at the edge, you've got Jared Smith coming in. And all of a sudden, it's like, okay, all right. I do think interior depth still needs to be addressed, but you've got plenty of time at this point. One, you need to get M'ba or a guy of his caliber, just a solid P4 caliber defensive tackle to come in. Ideally, you get them before spring so you can have as many guys that you expect to be on the team for this upcoming season during the spring. We've kind of been down that road before and it didn't work. But you'd love to see a clear two deep at all of these spots along the defensive front going into spring. And I think they're going to be in position to do that, which you absolutely love to see. And I think there's a chance that from a pass rushing standpoint, you're even better than a year ago. I didn't think the drop off at the end of the year, not the season as a whole, but the last 4 or 5 weeks of the season, I didn't think there was a major difference between J-Mac and Kieran Crawford, because Kieran Crawford really took that step forward. First half of the season, I think the gap between them was pretty wide. But you look at what Chris Murray brings. I talked about him a ton on this morning show. I'm really, really high on what he can bring. But just the upside of so many of these guys that are on this roster, I think you can make some assumptions going into this season that is going to allow you to feel better about where you're at. And I want to tackle these assumptions. Are these assumptions okay to make going into this season? That's next, right here on Locked On Auburn. Today's show brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. The FanDuel app gives you everything you need for live bets, same game parlays, and so much more. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $200 in bonus bets. That's at FanDuel.com. Make this NFL playoff season unforgettable over at FanDuel. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of the NFL and the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at Game Time. You hear it over and over and over again on this show. I only buy tickets using the Game Time app. They've got the Game Time price guarantee. If you can find a similar ticket, and by similar, I mean the same ticket that's in the same section and row, cheaper elsewhere, Game Time's going to give you 110% of the difference. They are confident. They are absolutely confident that their prices are going to be the lowest. You also can have you could toggle on and off a feature that includes all of the pricing together, so you're not blasted and blown away when you get to the checkout page with the fees and the taxes and all of that stuff. You can kind of know that up front. So highly recommend Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, LOCKEDONCollege, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first or second listen every single day. This is a happy hour edition of the show. Wanted to hop on just for a few minutes this afternoon and talk about the defensive line because, well, I've been thinking about the defensive line a lot today, and I'm like, let's do a quick podcast on it. There's a few assumptions that I think are okay to make about this defensive line moving forward. Now, let me lay the groundwork here. This does not mean Auburn is good and ready to go into the season with the current defensive lineman, assuming they get Jeffrey M'ba or another 3 technique around his caliber before spring. They're going to need some bodies after the spring. That's what they did a year ago. And we'll see if there's, the Phillip Bleedies or the Isaiah Rakes that they can add after spring. I think there will be. Can't stress that enough. But as far as assumptions that I think it's okay to make going into this upcoming season is I think it's okay to expect a pretty large leap from a handful of guys. We saw it with Keldric Falk from his freshman year to his sophomore year last year. In fact, I was a little worried about the expectations that were being put on Keldric until Hugh Freeze decided to take him as a true sophomore to SEC Media Days to represent Auburn. I'm like, okay, all right, this guy's ready. This coaching staff clearly thinks he's ready. He must be blowing folks away, and that's exactly what he was able to do. But who can take that step? One, can Keldric take another step forward? You typically see your largest step between your freshman year and your sophomore year, but Keldric's different than other folks. He may continue to get better. And so I do think it's reasonable to assume Keldric takes a reasonable step forward. You got to think his eyes are on the NFL draft. He's going to get 1 year to overlap with his younger brother, JJ Falk, who's going to be on the same defense. That's going to be pretty cool for them. You just got to assume. But who else can we assume takes that next step? I think Amaris Williams has to be in this conversation. Like I just said, you typically take that largest step between your freshman year and your sophomore year. I think Amaris Williams, we can assume, is going to take a pretty large step forward. So much so that you almost hope that Amaris is too good where you can't keep him off the field, and this defensive staff is going to need to find ways to play Keldric and Amaris and Kieron Crawford and Chris Murray, especially in passing situations. It's like, let's just throw everything that we possibly can at opposing quarterbacks and let them know, hey, you've only got 3 seconds to throw this football. So I think it's reasonable to assume that Amaris Williams takes that next step forward. Another true freshman, like what kind of step can Malik Blocton take from his true freshman year to his true sophomore year? I think you're going to see some, which is super, super exciting. Can he reach that level of disruption that Marcus Harris was able to create, his brother, was able to create just a few years ago here at Auburn? We were told by folks close to the situation, like, yeah, he's better. He's better. Marcus told us that here on this show when we went to the Senior Bowl a few years ago. Said, yeah, he's got a chance to be better than me. And it's like, well, please, that's fantastic. That would be fantastic. And we saw signs of it early. I think it's a reasonable assumption to say, hey, Malik Blocton is going to take a ridiculous step forward. And I say ridiculous, not just a step. I think Malik Blocton will be significantly better this upcoming season than he was a year ago. I think it's okay to assume that. After that, it gets a little tricky. Like, is Bobby Jamison Travis going to take some major leap forward? I don't know. I don't know. Can Dallas Walker take a step forward from what we saw from him at Western Kentucky? I don't know. I think some of these guys are just kind of who they are at this point. There is one older guy that I think we can assume will take a step forward, and that is Kieran Crawford, just because the player that we saw week one and the player that we saw in the Iron Bowl are two totally different guys. We said that with J-Mac going into last year, and I think that's true. I think J-Mac continued to develop. So I expect Kieran Crawford to take a step forward when we're talking about this defensive front. But who else? Like Jamonta Waller, we don't know much about him. And like, is his development going to be hindered by the fact that he suffered that injury and missed a big chunk of the season because I believe it was his foot? What about Joe Phillips? Like, we don't really know anything about Joe Phillips since he signed, just because we haven't seen him. Sounds like his approach to the game is extremely professional. It sounds like he's 100% dialed in. This is a guy that Georgia really, really wanted. In fact, some folks thought Georgia was going to take him away. But ultimately, he stayed true to Auburn. Do we see a big step for Joe Phillips between his first year and his second year? You can make the argument with a lot of these guys. And obviously, these true freshmen, I think, are going to have an impact. There's probably going to be one of them that really, really is ready to play. Could it be a Malik Blocton? Could it be a Jordan Crawford? We'll see. We'll see. Or Malik Autry, excuse me. So the bodies are there, but they do need more experienced guys on the defensive front. And I think that'll happen after the spring. Hopefully they get Mba before the spring. We'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But all in all, I've just been thinking about the defensive line a good bit to myself when I was driving around doing errands and stuff. And I'm like, I'm going to hop on a show and just do this real quick. So let me know your thoughts. What's your two deep on the defensive front? Let me know either in the comments down below or on Twitter or over at thebarnauburn.com. Go subscribe today. Get $25 off of an annual deal. Thebarnauburn.com. Let's have that conversation there as well. Please like the video. Please subscribe. We'll see you next time. This has been Locked On Auburn.